An interesting topic to understand when you're trying to manage stress or even reduce anxiety is the human nervous system and polyvagal theory. Now, I'm no neurologist or neuroscientist, so I'm going to stick to the basics. So when it comes to the human nervous system, it's basically split into two parts. So you've got your central nervous system, which are all the nerves in your brain and in your spinal cord. And then there's your peripheral nervous system, which are all the nerves outside of your brain and your spinal cord. This is further split in two into your somatic nervous system as well as your autonomic nervous system. Now, your somatic nervous system are all the nerves that you can activate voluntarily. So it's the nerves in your muscles. So when you think, hey, I want to walk now, a message is sent from your muscles in your legs to your brain and you walk. So voluntary actions. Your autonomic nervous system, on the other hand, controls all of your automatic responses. So things like your heart rate, your breathing, your digestion. So, I mean, you don't have to think about, hey, I need to remember to keep my heart beating, or I need to remember how to breathe, or hey, I need to digest that burger. I mustn't forget, right? All of this kind of stuff happens automatically. Now, the two major components of your autonomic nervous system are your sympathetic nervous system and your parasympathetic nervous system. Now, these two are very interesting when it comes to managing and reducing stress and even anxiety. So let's talk a little bit about the sympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic nervous system is basically the nervous system that controls your fight and flight response and tries to protect you. Right? So it's on the constant lookout for danger or something that's going to harm or kill you. And if it perceives something like this, it kicks in our fight or flight response. And adrenaline is then released into our system, and it works with our parasympathetic nervous system to kind of move energy from other body systems to where it's needed to get us ready to either fight or to run. Right? Now, once the danger is over, our sympathetic nervous system normally hands back over to our parasympathetic nervous system, where we go back to normal and we can calm down and relax again. Now, the problem comes in when this doesn't happen and we remain in the state of fight and flight and have persistent fear response. And this can happen from a trauma or from chronic stress or anxiety or something like that. Right. Now, let's talk a little bit about the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, the parasympathetic nervous system, as I mentioned, once the sympathetic nervous system hands over, calms us down again and relaxes us again, and it slows down our heart rate and it slows down our breathing. But if there's an extreme case of trauma or fear or danger, it can go to another level where it actually shuts us down to protect us. Right? And this is where polyvagal theory comes in. And it's very interesting. So our parasympathetic nervous system is split into two parts. Right? The main component of our parasympathetic nervous system is our vagus nerve. And on the back of the vagus nerve is our dorsal vagus. And on the front is our ventral vagus. Now, our dorsal vagus is the state where, when activated, we go into shutdown. We isolate ourselves. We withdraw away from social engagement. We protect ourselves. We kind of play possum. We play dead. Right? It's a place of hopelessness and despair, really. And then on the opposite end, we've got our ventral vagus. And when we're in a ventral state, this is where we are socially engaged. We feel calm. We feel protected. We feel relaxed. This is the state where we want to be most of our lives, right? But as with everything, there's a balance. So to understand polyvagal theory, we need to understand that there's a hierarchy, so what's called a polyvagal ladder. So right at the bottom, we have our dorsal state, right, which is our state of immobilization, where we isolated, withdrawn. This is where things like chronic anxiety and depression display themselves, right? We remove ourselves from society. But there's something we need to remember here. Sometimes we need to be in this state. Sometimes we need to go and withdraw into our cave and lick our wounds so we can come out recuperated and healed. Right? So it's not all bad down in the dorsal state. It's all a protective state. Remember, it's part of the parasympathetic nervous system, which is there to protect us. Then the next level up is our sympathetic state. Now, this is where our fight and flight response lives. This is where you could say stress and mild anxiety live. Right? And then above that, we have our ventral state, which is our place of safety and protection, of calm and of relaxation. Right? Now, when we think of the polyvagal ladder, we can only move one step at a time. So we can't move from ventral to dorsal or dorsal to ventral. If we're in a dorsal state, we need to move up to a sympathetic state and then back into a ventral state. Now, how do we move from a sympathetic to a ventral state? Well, that is what we're going to cover off a bit later, but it's generally things like mindfulness, breathing exercises, exercise, yoga, things like that. Right. Now, what's very important to understand when we're thinking about our nervous system and polyvagal theory specifically is that there's a balance. We can't be in a ventral state all the time, and we can't be in a sympathetic state all the time, and we can't be in a dorsal state all the time. If we're in any of these states all the time, there's a problem. There has to be a balance. And of course, that balance should lean a lot more towards ventral, but there are times where we need to be in a sympathetic stage or a dorsal stage. Right? As I mentioned, sometimes we need to withdraw and we need to re-energize and recuperate and take ourselves away from people and isolate ourselves a little bit, which is a dorsal state. Now, the other thing to remember is that we can be in multiple stages at once. So we could be in a ventral and sympathetic state when we are participating in a competitive sport, for instance. I mean, when we're competing and we've got adrenaline running through our body, we're excited. So we are both in a sympathetic and a ventral state. Right? Same thing during sexual activity. Right? So why is this interesting to understand when it comes to stress and to reducing anxiety? Well, if you think about it, if you're on a highway somewhere and you don't really know where you are, someone's just dropped you off there and you've got a GPS, but you've got no signal, it's going to be very difficult to understand what direction you need to go in, and it's going to take you a lot longer to find where you want to go or your destination, right? But now, all of a sudden, when you get that GPS signal and you know where you are, you suddenly know which direction you need to take to get to where you want to be. And the same thing with polyvagal theory. If you know which state you're in, you know how to get to the next state. You can build a strategy to get to the next state. So you can, if you know that you're in a sympathetic state because of certain behaviors that you're displaying, you know what you can do to get yourself back to ventral. Same thing as if you're in dorsal, right? Okay. Now, there's two other concepts in polyvagal theory that might be interesting for you, and that is neuroception. Yes, sounds very sci-fi and fun, right? But neuroception is basically our little radar in our mind, or in our subconscious or unconscious mind, that basically is constantly looking out for danger. It's always looking for cues. It's like this little thing, and it's like this pinging out everywhere, going, is there danger? Is there danger? Is there danger? And now it really is the thing that has kept us alive as human beings for so long. It was a civilization, because if it wasn't there, we would walk straight into danger. Now, neuroception, as good as it is, can also be a bad thing. So sometimes what happens, if we've had a traumatic event, or we're under extreme stress or something, sometimes what happens is that our neuroception goes wonky, and it starts perceiving things that are safe as being dangerous, and even worse, things that are dangerous being safe, right? And that becomes a problem. Right? So neuroception is an interesting concept. And then there's co-regulation, which is the second concept. And co-regulation is really about that warm, relaxed feeling of connection with another human being. It's when our autonomic nervous systems interconnect with another person, right? And basically their calm and their relaxation mirrors onto us, and we mirror that back to them, and we become calm and relaxed and bring ourselves out of that sympathetic state, or wherever we might have been. Right. Now, human connection is very important for our survival and for our mental health. And that is why often when we talk about stress management and reducing anxiety, one of the big areas that we talk about is, well, how are you taking care of yourself? What connections do you have? Do you have friends? How often are you seeing those people? How often do you connect with other human beings? As you see, when we're isolating, we're in a dorsal state. Right? So we're in a state of shutdown. When we're in a sympathetic state, we're in a fight or flight state. When we're in a ventral state, we're in a state of human connection. And that's where we want to be.